Ethan woke up expecting a quiet morning, but everything shifted the moment he unlocked his phone. Ava had posted a single sentence on her story: "No one owns me." The words hit him harder than he wanted to admit. For 18 months, they had shared a home, routines, and plans for the future. Yet that post felt like a crack running straight through the foundation of their life together. Before he could make sense of it, Ava walked out of the bedroom, casually mentioning she would be leaving for a few days on a work trip with her boss, Cole. Her tone was too light, too rehearsed, and Ethan felt an unmistakable weight settle in his chest. Something was off. He didn't have proof, but instinct whispered that this trip wasn't what she claimed it to be. And in that moment, a storm he never asked for quietly began to form around him. Ava had always been active on social media, but the way she crafted her posts that week felt different. Each caption hinted at independence, freedom, and being unattached, even though she was still living in Ethan's apartment, sleeping in his bed, and sharing every corner of his daily life. Her online presence suddenly looked like a carefully built narrative, as if she was trying to preemptively justify something. Ethan noticed the shift immediately, even if he didn't say anything. It wasn't jealousy that bothered him. It was the tone, subtle but deliberate, like she was preparing an audience for a story he hadn't heard yet. Then, almost as if rehearsed, Ava mentioned she would be leaving for a marketing conference in Miami with her boss, Cole. She said it quickly, in the middle of putting on her makeup, not even looking up at him. When Ethan asked basic questions, what conference, what company was hosting, why she was chosen, she became strangely defensive. Her answers were clipped, vague, and increasingly irritated, as if his curiosity was an inconvenience. It wasn't the first time she shut him down, but this time it felt calculated. Ethan tried to brush it off, telling himself not to assume the worst. But then came the packing. Ava didn't pack business clothes or presentation materials. She packed lingerie he had never seen before, dresses that had nothing to do with corporate events, and makeup bags stuffed with far more than she ever took for normal work trips. When he asked why she was bringing that kind of wardrobe, she snapped that he was being controlling. She slammed the suitcase shut, as if that ended the conversation. Ethan felt his stomach tighten, a quiet, heavy dread creeping into him. He noticed more small details: how she kept her phone face down, how she deleted messages, how she suddenly took calls outside. Her behavior didn't resemble someone preparing for a conference. It resembled someone preparing for a getaway. The morning of the trip confirmed every suspicion brewing in his chest. Instead of calling a ride or having a coworker pick her up, Cole himself arrived at their building. He didn't just honk from the car. He parked, stepped out, walked to the entrance, and texted Ava that he was there. Ava didn't even look at Ethan as she rushed to meet him. Ethan watched from the balcony as Cole loaded her suitcase into his trunk with a level of familiarity that cut deeper than Ava's post ever did. They didn't look like colleagues heading to a work event. They looked like two people running toward something they shouldn't be running toward. Ava waved once, brief and careless, before the car door closed. Ethan stood there long after the taillights disappeared, a cold realization forming inside him. Whatever story Ava was creating online, whatever lie she had rehearsed, whatever trip she claimed this was, none of it felt like the truth. And although he didn't know it yet, that moment would be the last time he ever saw her as the person he thought he knew. The moment Ava's car disappeared down the street, Ethan felt a strange stillness settle over the apartment. It wasn't rage, and it wasn't heartbreak. It was clarity, cold, sharp, and undeniable. He walked back inside, stood in the middle of the living room they had once decorated together, and realized that everything he had been holding onto had already ended long before this moment. He just hadn't accepted it. Now he did. He opened his laptop and pulled up the leasing portal for the apartment. The renewal date was approaching, something they had casually discussed weeks earlier. But instead of renewing, Ethan clicked the button to cancel the upcoming year's lease. It surprised him how steady his hands were while doing it. He didn't owe her an argument, a dramatic confrontation, or a chance to spin excuses he no longer wanted to hear. He owed himself peace. Next, he went to the bedroom and opened the closet. Half of it was filled with Ava's clothes, jackets she never wore, dresses she bought on impulse, shoes still with tags. For a moment, he hesitated, unsure how it would feel. But as soon as he started folding the first shirt into a box, something inside him unlocked. The more he packed, the lighter he felt. He kept going, room by room. Makeup bags, hair tools, skincare products, perfume bottles, books she said she'd read someday. Everything went into neatly labeled boxes. He was careful, respectful, almost gentle, but he didn't stop. By noon, the apartment that once looked shared now looked entirely his. He rented a storage unit nearby and scheduled a pickup. When the movers arrived, they carried out every box with quiet efficiency. Ethan didn't explain anything to them. He didn't need to. Once everything was placed inside the unit, he prepaid a month so Ava would have time to claim it. He left her name on the account and took a picture of the access code. Back home, he went to the office drawer where the spare keys were kept. He removed Ava's and placed them in a small envelope. Then he called the locksmith, requesting a same-day lock change. If Ava had already mentally rewritten her life to exclude him, then he wasn't obligated to remain a placeholder in hers. When the locksmith arrived, Ethan watched as the old lock was removed and a new one clicked into place. The sound felt like a door closing, not just literally, but emotionally. He printed a short note and taped it to the counter. It wasn't angry or vindictive, just factual, clear, and final. He explained that her belongings were safe at the storage unit, that the lease was ending, that the relationship was over, and that there was nothing left to discuss. After placing the envelope with her keys beside the note, Ethan took one last look around the apartment. For the first time in months, the air felt clean. Quiet. Honest. He didn't know what Ava was doing in Miami. But whatever story she had chosen for herself, he had finally chosen his own. Ava returned 3 days later, dragging her suitcase behind her with a forced brightness in her voice as she chatted with Cole on the phone. She didn't expect anything to be different. She didn't expect consequences. She especially didn't expect the front door to deny her entry the moment she tried her key. The lock didn't turn. She tried again, harder, her expression shifting from confusion to irritation. Then she knocked, calling Ethan's name as if he were simply ignoring her out of pettiness. But the apartment stayed silent. Cole walked up behind her, arms crossed, trying to hide the fact that he was nervously glancing down the hallway. He clearly didn't want to be seen there, but he also wasn't going to leave her alone with a situation he helped create. Ava knocked louder, her voice sharpening as she shouted for Ethan to open the door. When nothing happened, she pulled out her phone to call him. Straight to voicemail. She called again. Same result. A third time. Silence. Her frustration erupted into pounding fists against the door. She yelled about how unbelievable he was being, how dramatic, how he was making a scene for no reason. Ironically, she was the one drawing a crowd. Neighbors peeked through door frames, whispering among themselves as Cole shifted uncomfortably beside her. He muttered that maybe she should calm down, but Ava snapped at him too, caught in the spiral of panic and embarrassment. Finally, a neighbor called the building security, and moments later 2 officers arrived. Ava immediately launched into a frantic retelling. Ethan changed the locks, threw her out, trapped her outside her own home, and refused to speak to her. She demanded they force him to open the door. But Ethan wasn't even there. He had gone out deliberately, knowing she was due to return. The officers asked for documentation. Ava froze. They asked again, "Do you have your name on the lease?" She hesitated before admitting she didn't. Her voice cracked, but it didn't change the facts. The officers checked the building records and confirmed the apartment was legally under Ethan's name only. They also confirmed that he had filed a notice of non-renewal and had informed management of an upcoming separation. Everything was in order. Everything was lawful. Ava's face drained of color as the officers explained she had no legal right to enter the unit. They told her she could not break in, could not damage property, and could not force Ethan to allow her inside. Cole stood there awkwardly, clearly regretting every decision that had led him to this hallway. Ava demanded they check again, demanded they make Ethan come home, demanded they let her in just to talk. But the officers were firm. They even warned her that continued disruption could lead to charges. Eventually, she was ordered to step away from the door and leave the premises. Tears of frustration welled in her eyes, but she had no leverage, no proof, no claim. Her humiliation only grew as neighbors watched her gather her scattered belongings while Cole suggested, very quietly, that they go. They walked back toward his car, Ava trembling with anger, betrayal, and disbelief. And as the door to Ethan's apartment remained locked behind them, she realized she had lost control of the narrative she thought she could manipulate. Ava spent the ride away from the apartment trembling with humiliation, replaying every officer's word in her head. The more she thought about it, the more her embarrassment twisted into pure, burning anger. She convinced herself Ethan had blindsided her, humiliated her, and dismantled her life without warning. And instead of taking even a fraction of responsibility, she chose retaliation. Quick, ruthless, and loud. The first blow came barely an hour after she left the building. She filed a formal complaint to Ethan's company, claiming he had been emotionally abusive, controlling, and unstable. She crafted the email carefully, adding dramatic details she knew would trigger concern. She sent it not just to HR, but to 3 managers, 2 team leads, and even the general company inbox. She wanted impact. She wanted chaos. But what she didn't know was that Ethan had already informed his HR department about the breakup and potential drama, documenting everything in advance. Her accusation was flagged almost immediately as suspicious. When she didn't get the reaction she wanted, she moved to phase 2. She took to social media, posting story after story about how Ethan threw her out on the street, how he manipulated her, how he abandoned her without warning. She left out the part where she had spent 3 nights in Miami with her boss. She left out the part where the lease was never in her name. She left out everything that mattered. Instead, she painted herself as a victim. Some friends believed her. Others were unsure. But she didn't care. She wanted attention, justification, validation, anything to drown the embarrassment she had felt in that hallway. The third strike was the one she thought would hurt Ethan the most. Late that night, she returned to the parking lot where Ethan kept his car. She waited until the area was empty, then approached his vehicle with her hood pulled low. In her trembling hands was a key she dragged along the car's paint, leaving a deep, jagged scratch across the entire side. She kicked the bumper. She smashed a side mirror with her shoe. Each hit came with a sob, with a curse, with a desperate attempt to feel like she was taking back control. But what she didn't know was that the parking lot had full security cameras. Every movement was recorded in crystal clarity. Still not finished, she tried once more to reclaim the apartment she believed she deserved access to. The next morning, she called a locksmith and told him she had been accidentally locked out. When they arrived, she tried to rush them toward the door before someone could interfere. But building security intercepted them within minutes. They checked the lease, confirmed she had no rights to the unit, and escorted both her and the locksmith away. The locksmith apologized, but Ava exploded in fury, shouting at security, shouting at Ethan in voicemail after voicemail, shouting at anyone who wouldn't validate her story. By afternoon, Ava's meltdown was no longer private. Friends who had doubted her began to distance themselves. Screenshots of her contradictory posts circulated. People whispered about the Miami trip, about Cole, about the reason Ethan had finally snapped. And despite every attempt she made to portray herself as wronged, the truth she was running from only grew louder. She thought she was escalating the drama. But in reality, she was building a case against herself, one documented by cameras, witnesses, emails, and her own posts. And Ethan, far from reacting, remained silent, watching as her own actions slowly dismantled the narrative she had tried so desperately to control. Ava believed the courtroom would be her redemption. She walked in wearing a carefully chosen outfit, her posture straight, her expression composed, rehearsing the story she intended to deliver with perfect conviction. She expected sympathy. She expected outrage. She expected the judge to demand why Ethan had dared to change the locks and remove her from the apartment she considered hers. But the moment the hearing began, her expectations began to crumble. Ethan sat calmly at the opposite table, accompanied by a quiet lawyer and a folder thick with documents. He didn't look at her with spite or anger. He simply looked detached, as if the person sitting across from him was a stranger. Ava mistook that for fear, believing he was intimidated by the inevitable consequence of hurting her. But it wasn't fear. It was certainty. The judge asked Ava to present her claim. She launched into a passionate speech about being thrown out without warning, about losing access to her belongings, about being blindsided and left with nowhere to go. She emphasized her emotional distress, her shock, her betrayal. Her voice cracked at all the right moments. Her hands trembled just enough to look convincing. Then the judge asked a simple question. "Ms. Carter, is your name on the lease?" Ava hesitated, swallowed, and admitted it was. The judge then asked if she ever paid rent directly, had any legal agreement, or had written evidence that the apartment belonged to her in any way. She had nothing. Not a receipt. Not an email. Not even a text. Ethan's lawyer passed a folder to the judge containing the lease, the non-renewal notice, messages proving Ethan had informed management of the separation, and the receipt for the storage unit where Ava's belongings were safely kept. Each document dismantled another piece of her story. And then came the footage. Clear, time-stamped security camera footage of Ava scratching Ethan's car, breaking his mirror, and attempting to force entry with a locksmith. Her face drained of color as the judge watched silently. The courtroom felt smaller with every second of footage. When the judge finally spoke, Ava already knew the outcome. Her claim of illegal eviction was dismissed immediately. Ethan had acted within his legal rights at every step. In fact, the judge scolded her for wasting the court's time and warned that the vandalism incident could be grounds for criminal charges if Ethan chose to pursue it. But the worst blow hadn't come yet. During the hearing, documents from her workplace were also reviewed, emails, travel confirmations, hotel bookings. The timeline didn't support her version of events. It supported Ethan. And when the judge asked about the Miami confronts, Ava's lie fell apart completely. Records showed that Cole had booked a hotel room, one bed, 3 weeks before the supposed work trip. There was no conference, no company event, just a personal getaway disguised as business. What happened next spread through their workplace quickly. Cole faced disciplinary action and was demoted for violating company policy regarding supervisors and subordinates. Ava, with the scandal exposed and the false complaint against Ethan documented, was terminated for misconduct and unprofessional behavior. She walked out of the courthouse trembling, not with anger this time, but with the realization that everything she had tried to hide had collapsed in a single morning. The narrative she curated had cracked open. The truth had poured out. And instead of punishing Ethan, the process had only revealed the depth of her own actions. The consequences she thought she could outrun had finally caught up to her, and there was no one left to blame. Ava spent the days after the court hearing in a fog of disbelief, moving from one borrowed couch to another, trying to convince herself that everything would somehow fix itself. She told her friends half-truths and heavily edited versions of the story, but the more she tried to control the narrative, the more it slipped away from her. People who once defended her began to back away quietly, unsure what to believe after the footage and documents surfaced. Some blocked her entirely. Others stopped responding to her messages. Her world, once loud and crowded, began shrinking at a speed she couldn't process. Ethan stepped outside the hotel and felt the chill of early morning air settle around him. The city was waking up, but inside him everything felt strangely calm, as if the storm he had been battling for days had finally exhausted itself. He replayed every moment, every unanswered message, every forced smile Ava had given him in the weeks leading up to this trip, and he realized he had been holding onto someone who had let go long before he noticed. There was no satisfaction in uncovering the truth, only a quiet acceptance that he couldn't control someone else's choices, no matter how tightly he held on. He took one last look at the hotel entrance, where everything had unraveled, and felt a surprising sense of release instead of bitterness. Maybe losing her wasn't the tragedy he once feared, but a necessary clearing of space for something healthier, something honest. As the sun rose, Ethan walked away without hesitation, carrying only the lessons he had earned the hard way.